So a few days ago I said I didn't know why people would use SASS nowadays, and maybe I shouldn't have said like that because there's a lot to unpack on that statement. So let's talk about CSS and check this out. So first of all, let's get one thing straight. I think SASS is a great tool. I used it quite a lot in the past, and I think we own it a lot in the ecosystem to SASS. Like it paved the way for a lot of things, a lot of other preprocessors, a lot of like nice features that are being considered in CSS spec nowadays. We first saw it on SASS and so on. So I'm not saying it's a bad tool. What I'm saying is that the features it has and the trade-offs we take for using it might be better somewhere else. That's what I'm trying to say. And let's break it down with the one that I opened up saying, okay, is that really such a big deal? Because when we talk about nesting, SASS comes right up to mind, like not only because of that, but SASS was extremely popular of being the one that does that out of the box. I don't think many other preprocessors do that because SASS has its own syntax and all the others are a little bit inclined to follow up on CSS specs and so on, and nesting CSS is just about now coming into shape. But yeah, let's talk about nesting. So nesting is this ability of writing definitions inside other definitions. So in this case, I have the docs item and I'm triggering everything that has the class docs item __ label that are child of docs item. And I'm also nesting the media queries inside, so it kind of works similar way to what container queries will one day become. And then I have others like this. So why do I think this is a bad idea? Because first of all, it just encourages you to write more and more specific selectors as it goes by. And it makes the code kind of hard to read. And out of the blue, you're trying to create this componentized view of your component, of your interface, but it doesn't really behave like that unless you're like coupling with something like CSS modules or stuff. But then you're like adding more stuff to the to SASS itself. So you end up having this very specific selector. So somewhere in the middle of your style sheet, there's going to be that very specific spike. And this is going to potentially, like what's going to happen is that, and we've already seen that this is what the kind of stuff that can lead to very hard to find bugs in your styling. This is where styles leak between one component to the other. And this is not going to be the case for this specific one because we have very well written class names like this kind of BEM-like ones. But even if that doesn't shoot you in the foot, what's going to happen? Let's see what happens when CSS is rendering. So we have this style sheet that goes to the browser. What's going to happen now is that the CSS OM is going to take this one, this class name, goes to your DOM, finds every element that has this, and then realize, okay, I got these elements, comes back to CSS, takes this other one, goes back to the DOM, finds from all the other ones that have the docs item label double trigger, and then goes to see if all of them are children of an item label. If they're not, they're going to drop that one, of course, for rendering. Goes back to your CSS, gets this class name, and then goes back to every item label that you already narrowed down and goes to see if each one of them are also child of a docs item. And then your styles get parsed and put on and rendered. So you're doing like 3 round trips where you could very probably be doing only one because you have a very specific, very well-written class name with this like BEM-like stuff. So what some of you might argue, okay, this is kind of a micro optimization and I don't even have such a big style sheet, so that's okay. That's a little bit of overhaul for the rendering engine. But I'm going to ask you, like, to what benefit? Like, this kind of stuff brings no real point to your user. And if you're already spending the time to write such a well-written class name, why don't you do that? It's just like a few curly braces to the top. And then you can say, oh, but then I can use this kind of selectors. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So this is it. So cool. So let's hop into CodePen and play around with some SASS nesting. So what I have here is just set like a few base styles. And then now I wrote like, okay, I defined that all my ULs have no list style. And then I defined that I'm writing my navigation list. So in the navigation, I have this little UL. And in this little UL, I'll have a few items. And then inside each item, I have a div and a span. And I want that every span has this specific color. Fast forward, I have to create another component, a contact form. And this contact form is going to have a list of inputs. And then they're going to have a label. And the label has some span inside because, I don't know, icons, whatever. So I wrote this little styles for it. So every time there's a span inside a form, I want it to be green. Life's happy, everything worked, everything is down here. So the problem with the high specificity is that going forward, like fast forward a few months, weeks, I don't know, somebody else in my team, maybe a few hours, somebody else in my team come around and say, look, now this label should actually be next to the input. So the easy solution is just to do this, put inside a div, right? But what happens is that because I have a very high specificity selector screaming up on top, that every time that a span is inside a div, it's going to be red. I didn't even touch the styles and I got this bug. So this is the problem of high specificity selectors is think about like you have everything going flat at one point. So every selector is singing on the same tone, on the same volume. And then at some point, all of them are going fine. And what's come last is going to be higher than the other ones because that's what you want to do. Like if you're close to the mic, you're going to be listened better. But then someone very in the back that should be singing a certain volume is now screaming, and that's what happened. That's not enough. Remember that Morgoth was figured out to be a bad guy because he was singing a different song than the Valors, and then they kicked them out. And yes, that I just quoted Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, so yeah, listen to Tolkien. He was really good at CSS. And that was it for the high specificity selector. If you want to dig into a little bit more, I recommend you reading about ITCSS, which recommends you that the specificity needs to go higher as you go lower. So technically this one would be in the end. So then now I know that this one is going to trump the other one, and you essentially know where to look for. The way it is now, you wouldn't know because like the specificity graph would be having a few spikes. And yeah, that makes it hard to read if you have like a real use case app. Okay, so this is my pet peeve about nesting. And moving forward now, we're going to talk a little bit about co-locating logic. It is true that SASS has a bunch of features like mixins and functions and color functions and a lot of stuff. So, and that's a very powerful thing. But my take is that it is best for us to have this kind of logic, this kind of programmatic definitions within our app's logic. What I mean by that, it's much more comfortable and ergonomic for us as front-end developers that write JavaScript or TypeScript to have our toolchain in disposal when we're writing logic. And that also allows us to have some more code reusability and stuff. I believe that styles need to be derived from behavior. Like form follows function in a sort of way. So if you're going to define color is going to be based on some kind of behavior in your app, put that composition and to put that logic that's going to define one of them within our app logic using statistical analysis tools and hopefully TypeScript as well for defining what functions are. And it's going to be much easier, in my opinion, to figure out and to split that logic and modularize it and so on. On top of that, JavaScript. So if you're working with front end, you can read JavaScript. And one might argue, yeah, you can learn SASS. It's not that hard of a syntax, but still, like, and it kind of decouples all the logic. Like, you're not taking JavaScript away anytime sooner than you might refactor some styles. On top of that, because it's text, it's very performant on any kind of compression technique, being it Brutally or gzip or whatever. So that was it. That was my take about why I prefer to use other JavaScript-based solutions for handling my styles. At this point, if you want to know, I usually default to using Tailwind, and when I need to write CSS, I prefer using a combination of vanilla CSS and CSS modules, sometimes using the CLSX helper. Hope to see you on the next one. Tell me off on the comments below if I'm still not convinced, or if you want to say something, or if you think I missed something, or if you want to go deeper into the whole specificity stuff and ITCSS stuff. I'm happy to do that. So see you on the next one. Bye.